Before I sat down to write this morning's talk, I thought the focus would be a detailed look at the imagery of both the Gospel and the reading from Isaiah. But then I felt drawn by contradiction and confusion. And so I'm going to do something a little different this morning and start with some questions for you to ponder. Do you ever feel pulled in opposite directions, knowing that you have a long list of jobs to do, but also feeling that you need to stop and pause and reflect? Or perhaps thinking that you understand something fully and yet are also still very, very confused by it. Advent can be such a time, knowing that there is so much to do in the lead up to Christmas, whilst also knowing that we should use the time to prepare spiritually for the coming of Christ. It can also be a rather confusing time as we look forward to the return of Christ, as Michelle talked about last week, whilst also looking forward to the coming of an event that has already happened more than 2,000 years ago, the birth of Jesus. And then at this time of year we have some of the confusing readings in our lectionary, such as the start of John's Gospel that talks about Jesus being the Word and being born, but also being there before the creation of the world. And then suddenly talks about a man called John the Baptist. And I'm going to add another layer of confusion onto this by telling you that the second Sunday of Advent is the day when we focus on the prophets. But though John the Baptist is a prophet, and our gospel reading today is about him, it is next Sunday when we particularly mark John the Baptist. So he's not the prophet we mean when we celebrate the prophets. Today we're focused on the Old Testament prophets. And to top it all, reading these Old Testament prophets can be very confusing. Some contain warnings of things to come, but that have already happened. Some of what they prophesied had already happened by the time it was written down. Some of the prophecies didn't happen because people heeded their warnings, whilst some happened centuries later, such as today's reading from Isaiah, which Christians understand to be about the coming of John the Baptist. And then some of their prophecies might not yet have happened at all. And so, when we look back at the Old Testament prophets, we're both looking back and also looking forward, as were some of the earliest readers of their written words, as were the Jews at the time of Jesus' birth, and as was Matthew when he sat down to write his gospel. But each of us is looking back and forwards from different perspectives. For example, when Matthew wrote his gospel, he was looking back to the Old Testament prophets to indicate how his narrative shows their fulfillment. For example, in today's gospel, he quotes from Isaiah 40, where he says that a voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight paths for him. Of course, he's talking about John the Baptist. And as he writes some years after Jesus' crucifixion, he is already looking back to when John the Baptist was alive and at work in the wilderness, baptizing people. But at this point in the narrative that we heard this morning, Jesus' baptism is still in the future. And yet Matthew and we, because we have previously read on into later parts of the gospel, Matthew and we know what happens next, in the future. But that is a future which is also now in the past. All this is rather confusing. And so don't worry if I've confused you. I must admit that was partly my intention. Because Advent can be a confusing time as we prepare and look forward for an event that happened in about 4 BC. And as we look forward to an event that has already started with Jesus' earthly ministry, Jesus opening the kingdom through a renewed relationship with God. And as we look forward to an event that hasn't happened yet, the second coming, but for which we need to be prepared at any time. These three are all now, past, present, and future, all held in one moment. For us, with our ordered, sequential, chronological understanding of time, this can be very confusing. But we're not dealing with human time here, but with kairos, or God's time, where all three can be held simultaneously. Kairos is one of the mysteries of faith, something to which we allude to often in our preparation for the Eucharist, when we affirm Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. Past, present, and future, all at the same time. So, now that I've confused you all, what practical use is this to us this Advent? Last Sunday, we started a new church year, and we also started a new lectionary year, the 3-year cycle of readings for our services throughout the year. We are now in year A, so generally the gospel reading will come from Matthew. Last year was year C with Luke, the main gospel source, and next year, year B will use Mark. I say generally we'll use Matthew. John, who doesn't have his own year, is interspersed throughout all 3 years, so from time to time his gospel will be used. And for some of the festivals and saints' days, things get mixed up as well. So, rather like I remember from French lessons at school, when we were taught the rules of French grammar and were told that it was always like this, except, and then we had to learn a long list of occasions when the rules weren't followed. For the coming year, the gospel will always be Matthew, except when it isn't. But back to Matthew. We will find that throughout Matthew's gospel, we have him both looking backwards to the Old Testament prophets, today's reading being just one example, to show how Jesus and others are a fulfillment of their prophecies, but also how Jesus himself is a fulfillment of the Old Testament story of Israel. For example, in Matthew's version of the Nativity, we have the slaughter of innocent, mirroring Pharaoh's killing of Israelite boys at the time of Moses' infancy. We have the flight into Egypt, contrasting Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. We also have Jesus entering the River Jordan before he starts his earthly ministry, a ministry to enable people to enter into a new kingdom, with its echoes of Joshua crossing the Jordan to lead the Israelites into the promised land. At the same time, Matthew is looking to the future, when this good news of entering a new kingdom will be shared with non-Jews by including the Gentile Magi in his nativity. A preface for the Great Commission we have at the end of Matthew, where the resurrected Jesus tells his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations. Throughout Matthew, we will see that the author is looking back to show how Jesus is fulfilling the law, the history, and the prophets of the Old Testament, and looking forward to a time when the news will be spread far and wide, something that we see started in the book of Acts and the letters of the New Testament. As we move through the present time of the narrative of Matthew's Gospel, we're looking both into the past and into the future. Matthew's Gospel is in Kairos, God's time. holding past, present and future in one place. And over the coming year, as we work through Matthew's Gospel here in church, on those days when the lectionary does stick to the rules, or as you read Matthew at home, you might want to bear in mind this threefold time, which is perhaps more prominent in this Gospel than the other three. And on this, the second Sunday of Advent, as we remember the prophets, looking back at them speaking of the future in their present, I invite you to pause during this time of preparation, to be in the moment of this present time, and reflect on how Jesus was and is to come. To pause in the busyness of our understanding of chronological time, relentlessly moving onward, and rest a while in Kairos, in God's time, and enjoy that we are all invited to be part of this new godly kingdom, a kingdom access to which was heralded by the prophets, made possible by the birth of a child over 2,000 years ago, and will be fulfilled in Kairos, in God's time. Amen.
Hopefully most of you will have seen the update. There's lots and lots happening as we go through December. Had a great day yesterday with wreath making. There were over 20 of us doing that, and thank you to Jane and others that made that happen. The Messiah happened last night. This morning at the 10:45, it's the Christingle service. If anybody has got a moment or two to put oranges into bags, that would be fantastic. Everything's ready, just need an orange putting in a bag, and we'll be ready to go for that. Next Saturday, between 2 and 4, there's a tea dance. Everybody is welcome. If you know people around you who would enjoy coming, Christmassy sort of singing and dancing and carols, all sorts, tea, cake, what more could you want? So that is happening. It's sort of being run as churches together, Wendover Dementia Support, but it is for everybody. And I know when I saw pictures of the last one, lots of people having great fun. Next Sunday, we've got 9 and 10:45. And then in the afternoon, there is a walk. So if you want to stretch your legs, it's looking like it's getting a bit cold, but that's happening. And Michael Crockett is the one to talk to about that. We've got the giving tree sat behind the service here. If you haven't already taken a tag or seen the list of things that we need, please do. They need to be back in church by the 18th so that they can then go to the Women's Refuge in time for Christmas. It is Food Bank Week this time. I think I forgot to put that on the update. But please do keep bringing things for that. Back there's a table with Christmas cards on. They're the Churches Together card. And our allocation of the streets are there. I've seen 1 or 2 people taking them. If you could take a road that is yours or near yours, please could you do that and sign the list that's there. It's just getting a Merry Christmas out to the whole community and a chance for people to know where to look for our services. I think that's all of my list. There is a poster there with the Christmas services on. The carols are at 7 o'clock on the 18th. On the 24th, we are going to have an outdoor celebration for everybody, 11:30 midnight service, 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock on Christmas morning. So that's all gone in here and out there. Look on your update and you'll see what is happening.